Hey everyone, and a huge welcome to Ghost Stories America. If you crave spine-chilling tales, explore haunted mysteries, and love delving into the darkness where nightmares live, you've found your sanctuary. I'm thrilled you're here. Prepare for the unsettling. Welcome to the channel.
Part 1. The Whispers of Blackwood Asylum. The old Blackwood Asylum stood on a hill overlooking the town of Havenwood, Massachusetts. Its silhouette against the setting sun was a constant, grim reminder of the town's dark past. For decades, Blackwood had been a place of despair, a repository for the mentally ill, the unwanted, and those deemed different by society. Stories of cruel treatments, experimental procedures, and unexplained deaths circulated like wildfire, fueling the local folklore. Sarah, a young history student with a penchant for the macabre, had always been fascinated by Blackwood. She'd spent countless hours poring over old newspaper articles, census records, and whispered accounts from Havenwood's elderly residents. Her obsession wasn't merely academic. Sarah believed that Blackwood held secrets that deserved to be unearthed, stories that needed to be told. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah decided to visit Blackwood. The asylum had been abandoned for over 30 years, left to decay after a series of scandals and financial troubles. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but a section had been cut open, inviting the curious and the reckless. Sarah, armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a healthy dose of trepidation, slipped through the opening and onto the overgrown grounds. The air grew heavy as Sarah approached the main building. The architecture was imposing, a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and boarded-up windows. Ivy crawled up the walls, obscuring the decaying facade. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. Sarah cautiously entered the asylum through a broken doorway. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The air was thick with the stench of mildew, dust, and something else, something acrid and indefinable. The floors were littered with debris, shattered glass, decaying furniture, and tattered medical records. Graffiti covered the walls, scrawled by previous trespassers, but some of the messages seemed older, more desperate. "Get out," one message read, scratched into the plaster in what looked like fingernails. "They're watching." Sarah shivered, trying to dismiss the message as the work of vandals. She moved deeper into the asylum, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. She explored the reception area, the administrative offices, and the medical wing. Each room was more disturbing than the last, filled with echoes of suffering and despair. In the medical wing, Sarah found rusty surgical instruments, stained examination tables, and rows of restraining beds. The walls were covered in diagrams of the human brain, crudely drawn and labeled. She imagined the horrors that had taken place in this room, the desperate pleas of the patients, the cold indifference of the doctors. As she continued her exploration, Sarah began to hear whispers. At first, she dismissed them as the wind whistling through the broken windows or the creaking of the old building. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Help us," the whispers seemed to say. "We're trapped." Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her ears, trying to make sense of the whispers. They were faint, distorted, but undeniably present. She felt a cold dread creep over her, a sense that she was not alone in the asylum. She decided to check the patient wards, hoping to find some clue as to the source of the whispers. The wards were located on the upper floors of the asylum, accessible only by a rickety staircase. Sarah carefully climbed the stairs, her flashlight beam dancing in the darkness. The wards were long, narrow rooms, lined with rows of empty beds. The walls were bare, except for the occasional scrawled message or faded stain. The air was thick with the smell of decay and madness. As Sarah walked down the first ward, she noticed something strange. One of the beds was neatly made, as if someone had recently slept in it. A small, tattered teddy bear sat on the pillow. Sarah picked up the teddy bear, feeling a surge of sadness. She wondered who had owned it, what comfort it had provided in this place of torment. As she continued down the ward, she noticed more signs of recent activity. A book lay open on a bedside table, its pages filled with strange symbols. A half-eaten sandwich sat on another table, its bread moldy and green. Someone had been living in the asylum. Sarah's unease grew with each discovery. She felt like she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Leave," they hissed. "You don't belong here." Sarah ignored the whispers, determined to find out who was living in the asylum. She continued her search, moving from ward to ward, until she reached the end of the building. There, in the last ward, she found him. He was an old man, dressed in tattered clothes. He was sitting on a bed, rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. His eyes were vacant, his face gaunt and pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sarah approached him cautiously, her flashlight beam trained on his face. "Hello?" she said. "Are you all right?" The old man stopped rocking and looked up at Sarah. His eyes widened in fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "They'll get you." "Who will get me?" Sarah asked. The old man didn't answer. He just started rocking again, muttering to himself. Sarah tried to talk to him, to get him to explain who he was and why he was living in the asylum. But he was unresponsive, lost in his own world of madness and fear. After a few minutes, Sarah gave up. She realized that she wasn't going to get any answers from the old man. She decided to leave the asylum, to come back another day with someone who could help him. As she turned to leave, the old man grabbed her arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "They're coming," he whispered. "You have to hide." Before Sarah could react, the lights went out. The asylum was plunged into darkness. Sarah screamed, dropping her flashlight. She stumbled backward, trying to get away from the old man. Suddenly, she heard a shuffling sound, coming from the end of the ward. She turned around, her eyes straining to see in the darkness, and then she saw them, figures, emerging from the shadows, tall, gaunt figures, dressed in white coats. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, but Sarah could see their eyes. Their eyes were cold, empty, and filled with malice. The figures began to move towards her, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Sarah knew who they were. They were the doctors of Blackwood Asylum. But they weren't alive. They were ghosts, spirits of the tormented souls who had died within these walls, and they were coming for her. Sarah turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran through the wards, down the stairs, and out of the asylum. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her seat. As she drove away, she looked back at Blackwood Asylum. The building stood silent and ominous in the darkness, its windows like vacant eyes staring back at her. Sarah knew that she would never forget what she had seen in the asylum. She had glimpsed the dark secrets of Blackwood, the horrors that lurked within its walls, and she knew that she had to tell the world what she had discovered. But she also knew that she was in danger. The ghosts of Blackwood Asylum didn't want their secrets revealed, and they would do anything to stop her.